Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Pushover. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hey, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. We have a little follow-up from our TMI, Too Much Information, Reading, Save Things for Later episode from last week. And first of all, I got an interesting tweet from Ron Gilmore, who is a listener, who had a couple of suggestions for students, which I wanted to point out because, these aren't the kind of apps that you and I use because the work we do is a little different. And, students, professors, people in academia, they have a need for a lot more metadata, citing sources and that sort of thing. There are a couple of apps that looked really interesting to me. One is called ReadCube, and we'll have some links in the show notes. And the other one is called Zotero. I think that's how you pronounce that. But both of them are for collecting links and information. And it got me to thinking a little bit more about Devon Technologies, because we both use DevonThink on iOS and on the Mac. And they have another app called Devon Agent, which is for doing research and collecting materials that way. And I haven't used it a lot, but I've started to use it because what it allows you to do is search multiple search engines all at once and, do save searches and that sort of thing. So if you're doing a really big project and looking for all sorts of resources, it's a good way to search Twitter, search Bing, search Google, search DuckDuckGo, all different search engines. And it also does some curating along the way through an algorithm that takes out a lot of the junk. So it can be a nice way. It's Mac only. Sorry, Federico, but it's a pretty cool app.
Yeah, I really wish that all of these research apps were also available on iOS, not as companion apps, but as real mobile counterparts to the desktop version. For example, Devon Agent. It's one of the apps that I always wanted to have on iOS. Because the idea of, and I can imagine like on the iPad with multi-touch and drag and drop, that would be beautiful. The idea of searching in multiple locations and sort of collecting results from multiple places in a single app, that sounds amazing. And I want to have that. But Mac only, so.
Yeah, it is. And it integrates really nicely with the Mac version of DevonThink too.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Hopefully someday. The other thing that a couple of people mentioned is Pinboard. And I know you and we had this in our notes last week and we didn't mention it. And I think primarily because neither of us are really using it anymore. But Pinboard is a bookmarking service that you can use to save articles for later. And if you're a premium subscriber, if I recall correctly, Pinboard allows you to actually creates a bit of an archive so you can go back and read materials offline, or if they disappear off the internet, you still have an archival copy that way.
I used to use Pinboard years ago, probably 5-6 years ago. What I noticed is that probably because there was never the perfect Pinboard client for me, I was constantly bookmarking stuff, but I wasn't searching. I wasn't retrieving the information that I was saving. I was just bookmarking and never looking for a specific bookmark again.
Yeah.
I work better if I have an app like DevonThink, or even there's a lighter alternative on iOS. It's called Keep It Together. I think just Keep It. It used to be called Together on the Mac.
Yes, I remember. Yes.
Yeah, now it's called Keep It. It's got like a K as an icon, which is an app like DevonThink. It lets you organize different types of content, like web, bookmarks, PDFs, images, and text notes. It syncs with iCloud. It's easier to set up than DevonThink, but it's also got a much, much smaller feature set. But this type of app, the database manager that's local to my device, and it's got like a Dropbox or iCloud synced database, it works better than Pinboard for me because I found a lot of friction in using the Pinboard website and finding these Pinboard clients that are also updated on a regular basis and that support the latest iOS features or iPhone screen sizes and all that. So my recommendation is, while I know a lot of people who love Pinboard use Pinboard because they primarily use Safari or Chrome on the Mac. Mm-hmm. If you're an iOS user, I have to recommend using something else.
I also want to mention, Federico, that you have once again shamed me, and I closed all my Safari tabs. I closed them everywhere. I did. I closed on iOS a total of 928 tabs, I think.
What?
On only two devices. And
that's insane.
I don't know how many on the Mac. It's not as big a problem there. So anyway,
Don't reopen as many tabs. That's the secret.
I'm not.
You close them. Now keep the number down.
Yeah, I've only got about a dozen open on my Mac at the moment. So, and it's been a pretty busy day, so that's not too bad.
Okay, all right. So what are we talking about?
Today we're going to talk about single purpose versus do everything apps. And that's kind of a broad topic, but we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the tension between apps that are designed to do one thing extremely well and apps that do lots of things and what the trade-offs and compromises are between those. I thought I'd let you start and tell me a little bit about your history with those kinds of apps.
It's a topic that I think about a lot. As someone who tries a lot of apps for work, there's always this problem of, do I want to be like John and have like 400 apps on my iPhone? Or do I want to find something that does multiple things in a single package effectively? And what I noticed over the years is that there's this very, very clear divide between utilities that do one thing and that over the years, despite updates and redesigns, they keep doing just one thing, one main feature. And these other apps that evolve over time, they become more complex until they can do a bunch of different things all at once in the same product. And they tend to come with a steep learning curve. Either you have to like read the manual, for example, or read through the documentation of the app. It's a very different type of product, and I think it's a fascinating discussion because there's the argument that it's easier to make something that can do a bunch of things. As a developer or designer, you don't have to apply any restraint. So if you think of a feature, you just add the feature. And that has the potential negative consequence of turning into feature creep, that you have an app that is too complex and it's unusable. But also, there's the counter argument of when you make something that can do multiple things at once, and if you do that intelligently, if you know what you're doing, if you design the app to be flexible from the ground up, then you can help people save money because they only need to use one product instead of 6 different apps. And especially in the age of subscriptions, when you're asking users to subscribe to 5 different productivity apps, and then you say, well, what if you could just use one app and you're paying one subscription? That becomes really interesting. And I wanted to talk about this. Which examples can we think of that walk this line between utility and do everything product? And how can we as users balance how we approach these products, and also how do developers balance the making these apps and thinking about the evolution of these apps? And I think I got a few examples that I want to talk about.
Yeah, you do have a few really good examples, and I think there's a lot of layers to this issue because one benefit of having a do everything app is that you don't have to switch apps as often. And, it seems like a small thing, but over the course of a day, that's a lot less context switching. That's a lot less mental overhead. You're working in one environment all day. And in some respects, that's a lot easier. On the other hand, I'm always hesitant to do that because I feel like there's a certain lock-in that happens there where you've got so much invested, whether it's money or time or data input, that it's very hard to switch away from some of those apps once you start using them. And one of the examples that I think is a good one is Evernote. I mean, Evernote's the kind of app that is very easy to get things into and historically has not been the easiest to get things out of. Over the years, I think it's kind of moving back towards a simpler approach now. But it was one of those apps that just had kind of feature creep, right? It had not only are you going to keep your notes in there, but it's also going to, scan business cards and have recipes and have flashcards and business chat. It got kind of out of control, and a lot of people abandoned it.
Just now that you're talking about
Think
all
about
the
it.
features, like I forgot about Evernote.
Do you remember all those?
They were doing recipes and flashcards and presentations at some point. Oh man.
at least on iOS, those were separate apps, but it was all kind of baked into the Mac app. And, I think we've both used that in the past and are not currently using it. But at the same time, if you peel away all those ancillary things that they tried to do and become everything to everybody, there's a lot of benefit to be able to have all the information you collect for whatever you're doing in one single place. And that's what Evernote started as. And I think it's kind of moving back towards that.
Yeah, which is funny because the example that I wanted to bring up is kind of similar to Evernote, and it's of course DevonThink, and especially the iOS version in this case. It's the one that I'm more familiar with, DevonThink to go. And to me, this is the perfect example of a do everything app, because especially on iOS, you don't see this type of product often. So you may be familiar with DevonThink because it's the app that lets you bookmark websites and add screenshots and maybe PDF documents and have a single database of all these items. But what is interesting is that it can do a bunch of other things in the iOS version. You can create markdown notes. So you can create text files and have markdown previews. You can convert file types. So you can turn like a note into something else, for example. So you have built-in conversion tools. And not only that, but you can edit PDF documents with a built-in PDF editor. So it's kind of like having a mini PDF expert or a mini PDF viewer inside of DevonThink. And so you can add annotations, shapes, highlights, and all of that. When you start considering all these features, you get why some people, they approach DevonThink and they go, this is way too complex for my needs. I don't understand what I'm dealing with. Is this a note-taking app? Is this a bookmarking system? Is this a PDF editor? I don't know. And on the other hand, you have some other people who say, this is perfect for me because I do a bunch of research every day and I want to save all kinds of information when I work. And I wanted to mention DevonThink because to me, it represents this idea of how can you make a product that can scale for multiple types of functionalities. And I store PDF documents in DevonThink. I annotate them in DevonThink, and it works really, really well. But I understand why it's problematic for some users to get started with the app. And that is where I believe that having good documentation comes into play. And DevonThink has excellent documentation, which you can read inside of the app, or you can go on the website. You can participate in the forum boards and talk to other users. But really, the built-in documentation, there's a table of contents, there's an appendix that you can use to have multiple additional links. It's really well done. And so having this kind of pro app on iOS with multiple features, with excellent documentation, I think that's the way to do it if you want to do a product that does a bunch of different things all at once.
Yeah, the documentation is even available as an iBook, which I downloaded both the iOS and Mac version documentation because it's nice just when you're thinking about a project and thinking about how you might use DevonThink to be able to go and just read through the comprehensive documentation once in a while. If you went all in, you could, because it has Markdown support, you could do your writing in DevonThink too, right? I mean, that's the thing with an Everything app. It could not only be a research aid in a place where you store articles and links and things like that and files. It could be your text editor, but neither of us are using it for that. And I think that's because there's certain tasks where I think a single purpose use case is better. And with something like DevonThink, I think one of the keys to using it successfully is not to just dive in and throw everything at it at one time. I mean, with DevonThink, you could put your receipts and your bills and your business stuff and your links and your text documents. You could put everything in it all at once, and you'd probably get lost pretty quickly and be confused and have just a soup of text and files. And it could be, a Finder replacement, all kinds of things. But I think what's better to do in starting out with an app like that is to have a specific project. It's a little bit like when you hear developers give people advice about starting and learning how to code. Have a project in mind, because then you learn how the thing works and how it can work for you, and instead of just throwing things at it and hoping something sticks. So, for me with DevonThink, it was when I have a really big research project, then I'm like, okay, this is going to be a DevonThink project. And I'm going to try, as I do the research and save things, to explore some of the functionality that I haven't used before and figure out ways that'll work with this particular project.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you mentioned how sometimes it's probably best to use a simpler utility. And I notice this all the time when I use DevonThink and PDF Viewer for other types of PDF documents. So usually I tend to keep all my PDF stuff, and that can be like documentation from Apple for iOS, or there's have you ever read the David Foster Wallace lobster story?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so it's this essay from Foster Wallace about the ethics of cooking lobster. And it's a really fascinating, I mean, it's a beautifully written and really fascinating topic. And I have it as a PDF in DevonThink because it's not available in any other digital format. I don't think it's an article that you can find on the web. I think it's called About the Lobster, maybe. Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, seriously, I found this through a link on Daring Fireball because I think Switzerland is now banning cooking lobsters while they're still alive.
Yeah, I read that. So I think I read that too. Yes.
Yeah. So I just started clicking through and I realized, oh, David Foster Wallace has written a thing about this. Anyway, I keep that, those types of PDF documents, I keep them in DevonThink. But there are also other types of PDFs that I deal with on a regular basis, and those are invoices and receipts and stuff for like business related stuff that I need to send to my accountant or stuff that I need to check for expenses. And I just don't think of DevonThink as the place where I can organize that content. And I prefer to keep it in iCloud Drive and to access those PDFs with PDF Viewer. And I thought about this. Why do I do this? There's 3 reasons that I think they can be safely applied to other kinds of utilities when you're dealing with this tension between do everything or do just one thing. There's sync and access. So I want my receipts and my invoices to sync quickly, and DevonThink's built-in sync can be slow. Whereas with iCloud Drive and files in iOS 11, you just drag something in and you're done. You don't have to think about anything. And a few seconds later, it's on your iPhone, it's on your Mac, it's everywhere. The second reason is search and being able to retrieve this content. Because I don't keep a ton of documents in my iCloud Drive. I mean, it's all these PDF documents are all about Mac stories and the business side. So when I go look for those documents, it's all I see. There's no other types of results getting in the way of letting me find these receipts and these invoices. And the third reason, which I think is the overall, it's the overarching theme, it's the context of the app that you're using. My brain thinks of DevonThink to Go as the place where I can find research material. It's where I can find documentation for iOS APIs, for example, or stuff that I want to read later, like PDF documents. But at the same time, my brain also thinks of iCloud Drive as where I keep all the stuff for my accountant. And so, because I guess I'm built this way, there's just no point in fighting what my brain believes is the right way to go. So I keep those 2 things separate, and I use a utility for for one workflow, basically, and DevonThink for other tasks, for research, for content that I write or content that I read. And I think it's useful if you're dealing with multiple apps and you go like, oh, should I use Drafts? Should I use Ulysses? Should I use Bear? I don't know what I'm doing here. Try to think of these 3 factors: sync and access, search and retrieval, and the workflow context. Are you using the app that your brain is comfortable with? I think that's a really useful exercise.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that it's a very touchy-feely type of subject because it's really what feels right for you. I mean, what you do is going to be different from what I do, which is going to be different from a third person and what they do. To me, of those 3, the most important for me is context, because that, especially when it comes to things like writing, that is critical for me. I use Ulysses, but Ulysses is for really only one thing, with a couple of very minor exceptions. Ulysses is for things that get published somewhere, which is usually either on the club or on macstories.net, right? So if it's in Ulysses, it's something that I'm working on that's going to be published somewhere. If I have notes, if I have Anything else, any other kind of words that get put on a screen, they're going to go somewhere else, whether it's notes or bear or whatever. It's not going to go in Ulysses, because I know when I'm in Ulysses, I'm working on something that I'm getting ready to publish. Thanks to Pushover for sponsoring App Stories this week. Pushover is a cross-platform notification app and service. What do I mean by that? It's no secret that we like to automate things at Mac Stories to make our jobs easier and to keep on top of things. One of the critical components to that is Pushover. It eliminates the need to keep checking a bunch of different sites and services. Instead, the information comes to us, which I love. It has dozens of integrations and works on iOS devices, Android, macOS, browsers, and with Internet of Things devices with a simple API call to deliver notifications. Pushover works with automation systems like IFTTT, Zapier, home automation tools like Home Assistant and Indigo, and even web plugins for things like WordPress and online shop systems like WooCommerce. What you can accomplish with Pushover is only limited by your imagination. For example, at Mac Stories, we use Pushover with Zapier to get notifications when Apple posts a new video to YouTube and when a press release hits the Apple newsroom site. Pushover is continually updated too, most recently gaining two-factor authentication support and a dark theme for its iOS app. Pushover also recently added image support, so it works with things like security cameras delivering images right to your phone. Pushover is available for both individuals and teams. For individuals, you can get unlimited notifications on a per-platform basis for just $4.99 after a 7-day free trial. Team accounts add things like centralized administration of users and a failover to SMS notifications for critical messages that can bypass Do Not Disturb and the mute switch. To learn more and start your 7-day free trial, visit pushover.com/appstories. After the trial period, Pushover is just $4.99 to use on a per-platform basis. That's a one-time payment for individual accounts, not a subscription. There's no monthly or annual fee. I'll put a link in the show notes, so please check it out and use the link so that Pushover knows that you came from App Stories. Thanks again to Pushover for supporting the show.
So my other example is Drafts 5, which is timely because it just launched last week. And we had a review on Mac Stories by Tim Nahamek. I hope that I said it right this time.
There's a tweet about that somewhere I saw.
And there's a tweet about, and there's a whole segment of Connected about his last name. Anyway, excellent review that he.
Yeah, he did. Tim did a great job.
Did a great job, and he wanted to work with us. So I'm really happy about this review. But what is fascinating about Drafts 5 is that I remember when Drafts launched, the first version in 2012. I did the review on the site, and it used to be this extremely simple blank page, this notepad with a handful of actions that you could use, like send to Tweetbot or copy to clipboard or send email. It's like 10, 12 actions maybe.
Mm-hmm.
There was no automation, no scripting, no custom actions. And over time, Drafts evolved into this mature, advanced, probably daunting product for some users that is an extremely flexible note-taking app that with version 5, by embracing this idea of tagging and workspaces and a modular interface, it can now be multiple things all at once. And this is an entire chapter in Team's review. You can use Drafts as a note-taking app, as always, or you can use it as a text editor, or you can use it as a journal, or you can use it as a GTD kind of app. And especially the idea of, it's an app that lets you type text, yes, but also in version 5, you can now create your own custom UIs. You can make your custom menus. Like you can actually write JavaScript code inside of Drafts to script the native UIKit components of Drafts. You can make custom menus with date pickers or text fields or checkboxes. It's incredible. And it kind of follows in the tradition of Pythonista and Editorial.
Sure.
They did this custom UI stuff years ago. But the main point here is that Greg Pierce, the developer of Drafts, I think he was able to balance the nature of Drafts, which is you open the app and you see a blank page and you can type. But the use of progressive disclosure, of features is excellent in Drafts 5.
Yep.
So if you want, you open the app and type and share a link to Tweetbot. And you're still going to be able to do that without no further complication. But if you want to, and if you know where to look, and when the app tells you, you can start making your custom actions, and at that point, you can do everything. I mean, short of importing pictures and videos, you can do everything now. You can deal with text, with Markdown, with rich text, with links, with JavaScript, with custom UIs. It becomes a do-everything app. So that idea of it starts simple, but it can become a do-everything type of product, that is really intriguing. And I think it's really well done.
I think it's really well done too. And I think the business model fits it really well too, right? Because now Drafts 5 is a free download. Now, some of those advanced features that you're talking about are part of an annual subscription, right? Or a monthly or an annual subscription. But the thing is, you can try out Drafts, you can use it as a scratch pad, and once you're willing to dip your toe, you're interested in dipping your toe into something a little more complex, you can. So it's almost like a progressive exposure of the business model as well as the feature set. And I use Drafts all the time, but I do use it more as a scratch pad than anything else. I'm really interested in some of these new actions and other features that have been introduced with Drafts 5, because it really there's more power to this app than there's ever been. And it's amazing what you can accomplish with it. I like the fact, if nothing else, that I have a place where I can go. I may be on the train and trying to respond to somebody in an email, and I have that unnatural fear that I'm going to hit the send button by mistake or something before I'm finished with the message. So I'll just type out a response in Drafts or something and do a quick copy and paste into my email client. It's the kind of place where I guess I'm using it more along the lines of the original intent, which was a quick capture and share somewhere else type of destination where words start, but they end up somewhere else. And that it's fantastic for that. And if that's all you use it for, that's fine. I mean, it's easy to do, and you don't have to really bother with the rest of the features. But if you're willing to invest a little time, and I think a little effort, and read things like Tim's review and a lot of there's an incredibly great community around Drafts and the actions and the directory that you can get through the Agile Tortoise website, where you can learn all sorts of things and just kind of explore what other aspects of what you do might be accomplished with an app like Drafts.
Yeah, what is interesting to me is that the idea that I can make it into a do-everything app. I can make my own writing tools. I can create the stuff that is missing for me, and I could probably use it as a text editor. I know that a lot of people don't like this approach of you have to build your own basic features. Like I was talking on Twitter last week with Jason. Besides editorial, which we don't know if it's still being actively developed or not, I don't think there's any other text editor on iOS that lets you do folding for sections.
Right.
Or jump between sections of a document. And the latter, the jumping between markdown headings, you can build it in Drafts 5. And some people don't like this. Jason was saying, and I think he has a point of, this stuff should be built by developers, not by users. These options should be core features of a product. But I kind of like it that I can make my own stuff, and that I can make drafts do things that, the developer didn't think of. The developer just basically created a playground. This is a very unique example of a do-everything app, because it's not like Devonthink that you install drafts and suddenly you have like 10 different options for things and file types and everything. But you can make it that way. If you install things, if you write things, if you create menus and UIs, it's a fascinating approach.
Yeah, I think Jason's point on this is very understandable, and I tend to agree with him. But the fact of the matter is that there isn't a really good iOS app that lets you jump between heading levels and things like that. And I'm sure that there's one out there that exists, and someone will tell us on Twitter or an email that there's folding in some apps. The thing is that I want that in the app that does all the other things that I want too, and that doesn't exist. All right, so when it gets down to do everything apps, I think one of the best examples of things that I use on the Mac are audio apps, because I use Logic to edit the show, along with Isotope RX to process some of the audio. And both of these apps are way more than I need. I mean, Logic is designed as, a studio recording type of music app. It's way more than any podcaster needs. The fact of the matter is that it's also great for podcasting for a variety of reasons, and that's why I use it. But I'm in constant fear that I'm going to hit the wrong button and do something terrible to one of our audio tracks, because that has happened, and I know it's happened to a lot of people. One of the ways I get around that is and I've described this before, I use Better Touch Tool to keep my fingers off of the keyboard as much as possible while I'm editing, using gestures and the like. But it's a good example of an app that does an incredible amount of stuff, and there's so much in there that I really don't have any idea what it is or what it does, but I know what I need to know and how to do it, and I do that every week. In that sense, very much a do everything app. And I wish there was an option. There was a really good podcast editing app that was focused just on spoken word audio and what people producing podcasts need, but that really doesn't exist. So I use Logic. And Isotope is an audio processing app, and the physics and math behind it, I have no idea what's going on. All I know is that I spent a long weekend experimenting with your audio tracks and my audio tracks and tuning them to our recording environments so that each week, all I do is I batch process them now. So I'll take your track, my track, and the sponsor read track, throw them into Isotope, hit go, and walk away. And, roughly 20 minutes later, it's all done. And it sounds a lot better because of it, but it's another app that it's like, all right, it's, a little bit of voodoo magic going on, and there's a lot of stuff happening and a lot of options that are beyond me because it's built for radio, audio professional types, and it's pretty complex, but it does a great job. And for me, it was just trial and error to figure out exactly how that works.
So that's how podcasts are made. You just throw files into an app and walk away, and suddenly you have a podcast. Sounds easy.
It is, Federico, and I like you to think that it's hard, but it really is like 5 minutes of work.
All right. So what have we learned from this discussion? I think those 3 points of sync and search and comfort, those are really important when you're considering whether you want to use a utility or you want to use something deeper that does multiple things at once. And I also think that of all the apps that we discussed, Drafts 5, it's the one that I prefer in terms of how they approach this, the nature of the product that can do a lot of things at once. I think the developer has done a really solid job in putting together the website, putting together the documentation, explaining the UI and the business model and how the features are not enabled by default, but you can make them your own if you want to. I think that's the way to go. Devon think, I love the app and I love the documentation, but I feel like it could be more intuitive. It could be better explained or some kind of better onboarding. I guess that most of the people who set up DevonThink to Go come from the Mac version, and DevonThink to Go compared to the Mac app is super simple. But I also think that there's quite a few people, I know because I get these tweets and these emails of people who say, can I just use DevonThink on iOS without having the Mac version at all? So I think there's also a new wave of users setting up the app just on iOS. And I think that ultimately the do everything apps, of which there are many, you can find email clients that have task managers and calendar built in. There's a Noteplan, I think it's called. It's a markdown app with a calendar inside, something like that on iOS. And there's, of course, Agenda on the Mac that is notes and calendar. There's tons of these examples of apps that combine different worlds into a single product. But ultimately, these apps are really hard to get right. And it's really difficult for developers to find the balance and offer an app that can do achieve wildly different tasks while still being easy to use and pretty to look at and not confusing at all. Another example could be iCab, for example, which is a browser in theory on the iPad, but it can do so many things. Like it's got a download manager, it's got custom gestures, it's got you can write custom regular expression based filters for iCab, and maybe in that case the developer has gone a bit too far in the other direction. There's tons of settings. The documentation is pretty inconsistent. I love iCab, but I can see, all along the spectrum. I think that Just 5 is a really good example of does a bunch of things at once, but it takes you there slowly. And with excellent documentation and with a website, with a community, it's really difficult to do this kind of app the way that I like it personally.
Yes, it is very difficult. And I think iCab is a great example because I too like iCab a lot and I keep it installed on my iOS devices, but I'm always hesitant to go there. I know that it will solve almost any kind of web problem that I'm having, but I know that it's going to be a project, right? I'm going to have to do some Google searches. I'm going to have to figure out how it works because there's certain things I know how to do in that app, but it's complex and it takes a little bit of there's a learning curve to figuring out how to do things. And yeah, I think your approach is right. I mean, I think personally, I'm more of a single purpose app type of person. At least that's my default. I will go to things like DevonThink is part of in my toolbox too, because it has phenomenal search and I can archive things in it. And for research, it really is hard to match. So I use it for that. I haven't made it my Finder replacement. I haven't archived all my email in it. There are a lot of things you can do with it that I haven't done. And I'm keeping it for now for research. And then I kind of explore the edges once in a while and try to figure out, is there something else that I could be doing in this that I can't really accomplish in one of the other single purpose apps that I use? So yeah, I think, that's kind of where I'm coming from on it. All right, Federico, I think that's a good place to stop. It's been a really good discussion today. And I'm sure there are a lot of elements of what we've talked about that we'll be exploring again in the future. I want to thank our sponsor again, Pushover. And you can find both Federico and me writing on the web at macstories.net and for Club Mac Stories. And until next time, you can find Federico on Twitter. He's at Viticci, that's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHN VOORHWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.